Okay, so for today's notes, we're going to talk about the heart sounds. Everyone has heard their heart beat before, and this kind of explains what it is exactly that you're hearing when you hear your heartbeat. Okay, so first of all, the heart sounds that you hear are the heart valves. So the heart valves are really, really important in allowing your blood to only flow in one direction through your heart. So you wouldn't want your atria to contract and then your ventricles to contract and the blood go backwards back up into the atria. That would cause really, really serious problems and would probably get you a trip down to DeBakey if that was a chance. Okay, so you have the atrioventricular valve, which lies between the atria and the ventricle. So you'll have a right and a left one. The AV valves prevent backflow back into the atria when the ventricles contract. So down here are the ventricles. Here is the atria. So you want a one-way flow, and you do not want it going backwards. And that's what that tricuspid valve helps prevent. And you also have the mitral valve over on the other side. And then the chordae tendineae, so that's all those that white, so kind of like these white tendon looking things is exactly what they are, and they help anchor those valves and help them to open and close. The aortic semilunar valve lies between the left ventricle and the aorta, and the pulmonary semilunar valve lies between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk, and they perform the same function. So you want blood flowing one way through the aorta, and again, you don't want it backing back up, and then you want it going one way going to each of the lungs, and so those valves will open to allow the blood to pass through, and then they snap shut so that when your heart relaxes, that blood doesn't flow backwards. So as you can see here, as the ventricles contract, so the ventricles, again, are the lower part of the heart. So as they contract, that blood, you follow those arrows in this first picture. There we go. In this first picture, the direction that the blood is flowing. And so here are the little flaps, and they open up, and that blood flows through. And then when the heart relaxes, the valves snap shut, as you see in B here. They snap shut and prevent that blood from flowing backwards. Very important. So the heart muscle is stimulated by nerves, and it's also self-excitable. So the little cells that make up the cardiac muscle, they want to contract, and they'll do this automatically. And you want the whole muscle to contract as a unit to make it stronger. So if every little cell was contracting at a different rate, your heart wouldn't function very well. And cardiac muscle contraction is similar to skeletal muscle contraction. So we learned about the sliding filaments and all that. And the same kind of mechanism happens in the heart muscle. So you have different nodes, and these are basically the nerves that help the heart to be able to contract. So you got the sinoatrial node. So this is basically the pacemaker, and it's starting out here in the atria, and that's going to be the first one who's going to contract, and then it stimulates the atrioventricular node, so number 2, which travels down. So if you follow that pathway, that yellow pathway down, and it travels down the ventricle to what is known as the bundle of His, which is kind of this little nerve ending right here, and it branches off, and it helps stimulate the valves to open and close both directions. And you got also what are called the Purkinje fibers. These are all just basically nerve fibers that are traveling around the heart and helping it to beat coordinated. So you want the atria to beat at one time and the ventricles to beat at one time. So the bundle branches carry the impulse towards the apex of the heart, and that is the apex of the heart. And the Purkinje fibers carry the impulse to the heart apex and around to the ventricle walls. And this electrical stimulation begins in the brain. So most people have heard of an EKG or echocardiogram, and you've seen these little blips on a screen before. So if you pay attention to each highlighted part, that's the part of that EKG that you're seeing. So when the SA node first starts to contract. That's the very, very beginning of that sound. And then that first little hump is when the atria contract. And then you have a relaxation, and then you have those the continuation of the electric stimulus down towards the apex of the heart. And then finally, the big one is when the ventricles contract. So the heart sounds are characterized as a lub dub sound. So the lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. So that's the sound of the heart valves opening and closing. The first sound is the AV valves closing and signals the beginning of systole. And the second sound occurs when the SL valves close at the beginning of the ventricle diastole. So you'll often, whenever you go to the doctor usually puts that stethoscope at different parts of your heart on your chest, and they're listening for the sounds of your heart valves opening and closing. So the sounds of the aortic valve are where that orange dot is. The sounds of the pulmonary valve are the blue one. The mitral valve are the red one, and the yellow one is the tricuspid valve. So they can hear to see if your heart is functioning the way it should. The cardiac cycle refers to all events associated with blood flow. Systole is the contraction of heart muscle. Diastole is the relaxation of heart muscle. Ventricle filling usually occurs mid to late diastole, so that is towards the end of the ventricles relaxing. The heart blood pressure is low as the blood enters the atria and flows into the ventricles. And then the AV valves open. At this point, the AV valves are open and the atrial systole occurs. So those valves are open. It's flowing from the atria to the ventricle. The atria contract, pushing the rest of that blood out. Then when the ventricles contract in systole, the atria are now relaxed. The ventricular pressure rises, which closes those valves, preventing it from going backwards into the atria.